now empowered government bureaucrats to tell you what your health care looks like. And guess what the result is? You can't afford it. You can't go to the doctors of your choice. You can't get insurance. You're being told you can't have a job. You got to take a shot that they tell you got to take. And then suddenly you don't own your life anymore.
Welcome to another exciting episode of TFVC Shot Callers. I'm Rebecca Hardy, the president. I am here today with Michelle Evans, our political director, as well as our very special guest, Congressman Chip Roy. Welcome to the show.
Great to be on. Appreciate everything you guys do.
Ditto. Well, wonderful. Well, I'm going to just read a quick bio and we'll hop on in. And so you are currently serving your third term in Congress. You represent Texas's 21st congressional district, which covers South Austin, San Antonio, and the Texas Hill Country. You currently serve on the House Judiciary Rules and House Judiciary Rules and Budget Committees, and you're the policy chair of the House Freedom Caucus, and as well as being one of the most outspoken on some of the injustices during the COVID response. So we just are so appreciative of you and your voice and your advocacy on our issue.
Well, thank you. You're kind, and but we can't do it without you guys being out there on the front lines, making sure that people know the truth, building both the coalition of the willing to speak out, but then using that voice to make sure the average American knows the real impact of a over-vaccinated public. To be clear, I'm not anti-vax. My dad had polio. We're blessed that there are things that we can do, and there are debates about that issue, and I get it, and all of those things, but we are highly over-vaccinated. The average adult has something like 50 vaccines in their lifetime, and I think that number has been increasing. This is a real issue, and COVID, for all of its major issues and problems, at least shine the light on this reality. And so maybe there'll be a blessing out of that, like it did our broken education system. So thank you for all you all do to shine the light on this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, you made a lot. You literally answered the first question I was going to ask you. So thank you. Because there really are. I would just really appreciate your insights into why mandates are not okay, and your insights into vaccine science, and why this is important to you.
Well, look. We all went through the COVID nightmare, and I don't mean the nightmare that the media put out there. But the nightmare of having a tyrannical government force vaccines upon the American people, on top of all the mask nonsense, on top of all of the shutdowns, on top of what it did to our kids and setting them back, on top of what it did to our economy, on top of what it did to prevent loved ones from being able to see each other in the hospitals. We had this forced vaccine issue, which forced Americans to lose their jobs. I can't even possibly put into words how ridiculous it is. We had men and women in uniform who literally lost their lifelong dream. I had one guy who lost the ability to be the commander of a submarine, his whole lifelong dream, because he thought it was not in the interest of him or his family that he take this, what is by definition an experimental vaccine. And those who suggest otherwise are lying to the American people. Right? This was all forced through on emergency use. This was jammed down the throats of the American people on emergency use. And by the way, there is blame to go around on all political sides here. And I want to be very clear that about Dr. Fauci, but also that occurred under a Republican administration. It got, pushed down the throats once it got out on the Democrat administration. And so lots of fault to go around to everybody. But, we know that this is all a product of a long broken system that dates way back, particularly to the mid-1980s, when we basically exempted pharma from liability for the consequences of whatever happens with vaccines. And we need to address that. We need to address it globally, but we took a very specific shot in the legislation that I put forward, which is HR, I think, 5525, which removes federal liability for the COVID-19 vaccine specifically, as a way to open the door to that whole issue. I'm sorry, I think it's HR 7551.
The Libel Act. And
Yes.
since you filed that in the spring of this year, have you gotten any pushback from either your colleagues or lobbyists or anybody that's trying to stall it or put a barrier up?
Well, you naturally get resistance because what you have, I find resistance on two fronts. Well, three fronts. One is just this like, well, nobody wants to talk about COVID anymore, Chip. Let's move forward. And I'm like, I think we need to talk about COVID a lot, because if we can't agree that that was a sin, that it was an absolute abomination of the use of governmental power on the American people, then I don't know why we're even in the business of what we do as conservatives trying to restrain government. Because if we can't stop that and use that as an example, then we should get out of the conservative business. Number two is you do get pushback from pharma. They say, well, no, you cannot touch the liability protections, because then we will not get vaccines. We won't get the people putting forward the, all the entrepreneurial, efforts and whatnot into creating vaccines. Well, now look, pause. Like I said, we can debate about vaccines. My dad had polio, and as I said, and there are questions about the polio vaccine, and I get that, but by and large, we eradicated polio in the United States, and I'm glad. I will say that. I'm glad. I watched the devastation that polio wreaked on my father. I had cancer. I'm the beneficiary of really good research that provided a drug that wiped out my Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'm grateful for that. I got in trouble in a hearing because I said I want pharma to be rolling in money for having developed that and selling it, because it saves lives. That being said, pharma is rolling in money by virtue of government cronyism, corporate cronyism, colluding with government. They use the power of the government to mandate these things. They escape liability, and then they laugh all the way to the bank while their profits soar and their lobbyists are running around town, to the tune of thousands of lobbyists that are, in the healthcare world, outmanning the man, woman, and child on the streets of America, who are left holding the bag with 50 vaccines in their babies, and they can't afford healthcare. We have to end that. And so we get pushback in that regard. And then in general, we get some pushback just because people get a little bit kind of weird about vaccines. They're like, oh, I don't want to be seen as an anti-vaxxer. This is one of these false choices, in my view. Some people say, Chip, you're either a dove or a hawk. Well, in war, right? Speaking about, well, there's actually a third way, which is peace through strength. Don't screw with my country or I'll blow you up, right? That's kind of a third way, as opposed to, oh, I'm an isolationist and I'm not in war, or I'm always at war. Well, it's the same thing with this. You can have a third way, which is, I want all the information. I want to be able to right a wrong through liability and be able to go and say, hold on a second, you ran that vaccine through and now there's a harm. That's the way we do everything else. So there is a third way to guarantee that people have access to life-saving medicine, eradication of terrible diseases, but it's not forced upon them by a government that is in corporate cronyism collusion with the very people making tons of money off the back of it, in a revolving door where all of our NIH people are all running out and making a bunch of money over at pharma at the same time. So I just unloaded a lot, but that's what I think.
I love that. I love that. Especially, I know, preach it. Amen. I love the way that you phrase that. I really do. I mean, it should not be a fringe idea to have informed consent when you have a medical choice in front of you, nor should it be a fringe idea to have the manufacturer liable for their product. These should not be controversial anymore.
No, that's exactly right. And I think we've got to be more bold, and we've got to be more engaged in trying to make people understand this. And we can't shy away from using COVID to highlight the reality of all of this. And now you've got, again, how many vaccines should we be taking? And let me pause for a second. Let's put the issue of vaccines aside, even though that's obviously the central point to y'all's existence in this podcast. But the over medication is an even broader topic than just vaccines. And then the over, let me just call it the big farm, big ag, big food in America that's pumping our bodies full of all sorts of garbage. And, wondering why we're, fat and need lots of medicine because we're just a messed up country. Like, well, how about maybe we just get back to people being able to grow their food, eat the cattle down the street, take, a steer raised near me, take them without the USDA telling me what I can or can't do, be able to go get milk from the local dairy, grow food locally, eat the food without it being all this processed garbage. And then, oh, by the way, wonder why when you have all that processed crap and you inject your body with 50 frickin' vaccines, I wonder why cancer rates are going up, or I wonder why people don't feel that good. So why don't we do something to get back to, I don't know, the world God gave us?
And even asking questions has been, the act of asking questions has become some sort of fringe thing too. I mean, you're accused of misinformation if you even talk about the 1986 Liability Act. So we appreciate congressmen like you or legislators like you in general who are bold enough to take a stand in that area, because it is an unpopular stance to take, unfortunately. And I mean, you sort of addressed it earlier, but your Liable Act focuses solely on the COVID jab. Do you foresee a time in the near future where this will become, an umbrella act where we're taking into account all the vaccines that are on the childhood schedule currently?
So look, the reason I focused on HR 7551 on the Libel Act to target the COVID vaccines only was because I thought it would be a little bit, I'm just going to be blunt, a little bit easier to kind of open the door because everybody kind of got the joke. It's an emergency use situation. It's been jammed through. Everybody kind of lived it. And it raised real questions, and questions we're still trying to gather all the information and understand, what did it do? What was the benefits? What were the negatives? And we've got a laundry list of those things that we can go through. I don't think that's the purpose of this conversation, but there's that. So then does that open the door to the larger conversation? I think it does. I do think the larger conversation is slightly more complicated because you've got to look at how these things are structured to ensure that, you don't eliminate the incentive for some companies who need to get out there to try to figure out good solutions where they need to. But most things, I'm pretty suspect. Most ways that we engage in the world, liability is an important part of the equation to make sure that corporate America can't just get away with doing whatever they want. Look, I always say when I went to law school, it became very clear to me there were three general options. Either the corporate world grinds out the people, right? They do whatever they want to do. And then they can harm people. They can sell you a car that the brakes don't work or whatever it is. Or you're going to have massive regulation. The government is going to literally funnel everything through the safety bubble. They're going to wrap everybody in bubble wrap and put them in a car that can only go 5 miles per hour. Highly regulated, safe society. The third option is liability. It's don't mess up. And if you mess up, you're going to get a massive lawsuit up the rear end. So, that's I think the choices that you can have. And I tend to prefer allowing people to go to court, make their case. Now, there are a lot of issues there with trial lawyers and don't let abuses go down, all that stuff we got to sort out. But I think the pendulum went way too far, and we need to bring that back and restore some of the incentives to make sure that companies don't jam these things through, particularly on emergency use.
Very good. Okay, well, let us shift. Yeah, we completely agree. Let's shift gears right quick. I kind of want to get a peek behind the curtain, if you will. Talk a little bit about how it was like being a legislator during the height of the pandemic.
Well, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I want to make one point that I think I didn't make, which you all know, right? But that the vaccine injury fund that has only paid out 14 out of 10,000 and change claims for vaccine injury related to COVID-19, despite hundreds of millions of doses having been administered. That's a really important part of that, and I want to make sure that was out there. But yeah, being a legislator, I mean, look, we forget about that, right? We tend to just kind of sweep aside all that we went through at that time. And I kind of almost forget about it, and then I get reminded, and you go, wait, that was real? That wasn't just a dream, right? Where you're totally shut down. This thing happens. And then I remember, we finally, everything's closed. The kids are out of school. Then I go to the airport to hop on a plane to come back up here to vote. And literally there were like 3 people on the airplane. And I'm in an airport with nobody there. And I parked in a garage with no cars. It was almost like the book series, if you're a Christian, Left Behind, where all of a sudden you're just looking around and you're going, where am I? Like I'm sitting in the airport and there's nobody here. And then I fly to DC and there's kind of nobody around on the streets. It's a ghost town. You come to Capitol Hill. You have members of Congress here, and then they started enforcing mask mandates. You got to wear a mask, and if you don't wear a mask, you're going to get fined. So some of us chose to take a fine so you could then get part of a lawsuit to say that's ridiculous, right? Then it was like, well, we're going to force vaccines, and we said over our dead body. We didn't mean literally, by the way. And so, but we're saying, look, we're not going to do these mandatory vaccines, but then we're trying to fight for the people, and then we're passing these, $1 trillion bills and shutting down businesses. And then, all of that was occurring. And then you can't even believe that lasted for months, right? Of like mandatory masks. And, we spaced out where we sat in hearings and didn't have hearings. And then we did stuff by Zoom. And then you had naked congressmen sitting in their beds because they're freaking in their bedroom on Zoom. Like it was just a whacked environment.
No plexiglass.
All right. Yeah.
Well, you wanted the full story.
It's great. I can't even imagine. And I've heard Thomas Massey talk about it a bit, how he was just standing alone on the floor to take a vote, but it's very surreal.
Yeah.
The thing is though, that all pales. That was just my life as a congressman. I was driving around the district, delivering tacos to, first responders, trying to go see people. To be out, when the first restaurant opened up in Austin, Texas, the day the restaurants were allowed to open, I took my wife and my kids and went down and ate and because I wanted to convince people to go out and go to restaurants because we were killing all of these small businesses because we shut everything down. And then add the vaccine mandates on top of it. And then everybody had to fill out forms. They couldn't go to school. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a dad who was going for a visit to a law school with his kid. And they couldn't without signing that I took a vaccine. And then you forget all the stuff that everybody had to do. And look, and I just refused. I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you whether I've had a vaccine. I mean, everybody kind of knows where I landed on that, but I've stayed consistent since the beginning. I'm not going to tell you. None of your damn business. And I've been consistent with that from the very beginning. And I think it's really important. And COVID was one of the things that kind of blew that up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you, Congressman. There were some, if you can call them silver linings, to all of this. And a lot of it is, one of them is kind of the wool has been pulled out. We are now much more attuned collectively as a nation to big pharma overreach and medical corruption and all of that. And you're right, we best not forget what happened, right?
Well, that's one of the things that I think is one of the most important takeaways is that we've got to use that as a rallying cry, if you will. I mean, I'm not going to compare it to the Alamo, right? But you got to have a rallying cry for healthcare freedom. And that healthcare freedom is the right to not have the government jamming a needle in your arm or telling you you're not going to be able to go to work. It's the right to be able to have your kids go to school without being shoved in the corner, being forced to wear masks. It's the right to be able to go to the doctor of your choice without them going to an insurance bureaucrat to be told whether or not you can get health care or not. And this is the reality of the world we live in because we have now empowered government bureaucrats to tell you what your health care looks like. And guess what the result is? You can't afford it. You can't go to the doctors of your choice. You can't get insurance. You're being told you can't have a job. You got to take a shot that they tell you got to take. And then suddenly you don't own your life anymore. That's not America. And we ought to do something about it.
All right. Well, let's shift gears right quick and just lay out a little bit on what you think your biggest concerns about vaccine choice rights in Texas are, and how would you propose that state legislators address them?
Well, what I'll tell you is, and then I'm probably going to have to jump because I've got Callie Means and some other folks that I'm about to go meet with to talk about, healthy choices and a lot of those issues, which I think are kind of relevant in your all's world as well. But right now, what I would tell you is we've got to make some decisions as we head through the election season. We need people who actually believe in what I call healthcare freedom. I am emboldened by the fact that President Trump has aligned with RFK Jr., who I do not agree with on a lot of things, but we have a lot of overlapping beliefs about the state of big corporate America, big corporate healthcare. What's going on with the healthcare community and pharma and all of those issues. And so I'm glad that there's a voice there that's contrary to the normal Chamber of Commerce Republican worldview in DC that needs to be frankly broken. And so to answer your question, we need radical transformation. We need a new trajectory for healthcare freedom. We need a new trajectory for a healthy America. Those things are related. And I think that we've got an opportunity to do that if we elect the right people. But even if we do, Congress has got to get their head out of their rear ends and actually do something. Stop sitting around pointing at each other about, who's, the most principled or who's doing the best or whatever. Let's go advance a piece of legislation that will actually transform America. And we need everybody to get on board and go, defeat the radical, tyrannical government healthcare zealots who are taking away our ability to have healthcare of our choice.
Thank you very much for being on here. And you do have an opponent in the general, is that correct?
I do. It's a woman who is a former Elizabeth Warren staffer who, is running against me. But, we're staying focused. We're trying to turn out the vote. If you're watching this, I certainly appreciate your support. But bottom line is we got to come together to go fight for healthcare freedom.
Well, if anybody wants to look up more information.
And we so appreciate yeah. Sorry.
Is there some place where people can find out more about you and where you stand on other issues as well?
Yeah, sure. On my official website, it's roy.house.gov, roy.house.gov. My social media account's Rep Chip Roy, or my personal account is Chip Roy TX, CHIPROYTX. And you can find my other social media on all those websites. But certainly can go find out more information. But easy to find.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful. I just want to thank you for joining us today. You have a lot of fans in Texas. We are so thankful for your voice in these issues and for being the fighter that you are for vaccine choice for all Americans. So thank you, Congressman, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Michelle. God bless.
Thank you for listening to the Shot Callers podcast. Please, if you found value in this content, rate us and share the podcast with a friend. It's a great way to get the message out and to empower everyone to make informed decisions. Until next time, never forget, we are the Shot Callers.